Wargaming doesn't tell us a lot of stuff. Sometimes it's great and it really builds up hype, like the upcoming Battle Pass, but sometimes, not so much. But there are a few tank stats that are not actually shown in the garage, which are quite crucial to the inner workings of a tank, and I've put together a list of 7 of these things, and I'm going to go over and explain each and every one of them. So starting things off, we have unequal gun depression. Now you might have heard somebody like Meadsy talk about how you get more gun depression over the back of the waffle, which is very true. You get 2 degrees, I believe, over the front, but you get 10 degrees over the back, which is very nice. But this is not just a quirky feature that affects the waffle and a few others. It affects so many tanks like the IS-3, the T-54, the Sheridan. These things can hardly depress the gun over the back of their vehicles, and with a tank like the FV-4202, that thing has to elevate its gun to get over the back of the vehicles. Good luck shooting behind you in the FV-4202. And these statistics aren't even shown on the website like BlitzStars or Blitzhanger, so you have to figure it out for yourself in game, which is pretty brutal to do so for every single tank you play. The second thing is dispersion factors, otherwise known as stabilization. Have you ever wondered why when you're playing a certain tank, the aiming circle blooms so much whenever you move, whenever you shoot, whenever you rotate the turret? It's because there are hidden dispersion factors that are determined by how much your aiming circle increases upon doing certain actions, and now it's much bigger for other tanks, namely Russian heavies, for example, have horrible dispersion factors, whereas a tank like the British tanks have really good dispersion factors, and hence don't bloom as much. And these really give you an idea of just how good the gun handling is, because dispersion alone is just the maximum accuracy, but the accuracy you'll tend to be dealing with will be determined by these dispersion factors. For example, this is what a tank with good stabilization looks like upon moving. And this is what a tank with bad stabilization looks like upon moving. A very important feature, especially to TDs, that exists is something called aiming arc. Now, this isn't shown to you in the garage, but it dictates how far a tank can rotate its gun to the left and to the right. So, for example, on the Jagdpanzer 100, its aiming arc is huge, which allows it to sidescope extremely well. But for a tank such as the Foch 155, its aiming arc is only 6 degrees to the left and right, so you will have to rotate the tank a lot to the left and right, and it will be affected by these dispersion factors, and if they're not good, it's going to be really painful to re-aim in your shot after just moving an inch. It is also worth mentioning that turreted TDs also have a limited aim arc. No tier 10 TD can rotate its turret all the way around. For example, the Grille can go 45 degrees to the left and to the right. The T110E4 can go 90 degrees to the left and right. The 183 can go 45 degrees to the left and right. It's much better than non-turreted TDs, but still not as flexible as a proper turret. The fourth thing is actually really huge, and this is shell velocity. Now, what is shell velocity? It's how quickly your shells travel across the map. It's not a huge issue in Bot Blitz, because the maps tend to be small and most fighting is done at close range, but if you've ever fired something like an E100's heat shell, you will know it's just like lobbing it over and it just takes ages to get there, and you want your shells to be quick. APCR is the fastest shell, so if you've got APCR, that's great, but not all APCR shells are created equally and some go faster than others, and you're not told this. It is a huge statistic, probably one of the most important on this list, and it's just unbelievable that it's not in the garage yet. This fifth thing is also a very important thing, and it's about the effective power-to-weight ratios of certain vehicles. Now, much like in real life, vehicles sink in certain terrains compared to others. So, for example, on concrete, there is a lot more resistance on the ground, so the vehicle will be able to traverse much better. But on something like sand, the vehicle's going to sink down, meaning it's harder for it to get round. And then this is applied in-game in the form of effective power-to-weight ratios. So on hard terrain, your vehicle will be the most mobile. On medium terrain, it will be the middle mobile, and on soft terrain, it will be significantly less mobile. These terrains are usually concrete as hard, dirt and grass as medium, and sand and anything like that as soft. And it actually goes down significantly. For example, let's look at the mouse. Its power-to-weight ratio is 10.5 horsepower per ton, but on hard terrain that goes down to 9.3. On medium terrain it goes down to 8.5, and on soft terrain it goes down to 6.3. So your power-to-weight ratio is reduced by 40% on soft terrain. Now this is huge. Power-to-weight determines how quickly you go up hills and how quickly you accelerate, essentially how mobile you are, and you're not told that terrains even make a difference to your power-to-weight ratio. And this also affects your traverse speed. So let's take the mouse as an example again. Its traverse speed is, of its hull, is 23.4. Now on hard terrain, This is relatively the same. It's 23.1. On medium terrain, it goes down to 21.1, and on soft terrain, it goes down to 15.7, meaning that it rotates about 30% slower on soft terrain, which is huge. If you're being circled, you will want to know if you're going to rotate 30 degrees slower. There's also something called terrain resistances. Now, what these do is determine by how much your vehicle is affected by the three types of terrain. So let's take them out again. Its effective power to weight ratio is 10.5, and on hard terrain, it is 9.3. And for each terrain, a vehicle will be assigned a terrain resistance. So in total, a vehicle will have 3 different terrain resistances for the 3 types of terrain. The Mouse's on hard terrain is 1.1, and if we divide 10.5 by 1.1, we get 9.5. Now I'm using rounded figures, so the maths doesn't quite add up, but you can see that it's roughly 9.3, which is its effective power to weight ratio on hard terrain. So you can do this with any tank and find out its effective power to weight ratios. Now, a high terrain resistance isn't necessarily a bad thing. For example, a Chaffee has high terrain resistances, but because it's so mobile anyway, it doesn't really make a difference. But if you start to get terrain resistances of 1.5 to 2.5, that's going to halve your power to weight ratios, and as you can imagine, that isn't very good for any vehicle. So the lower the terrain resistance, the better. If it's a decimal, your power to weight ratio will increase on harder terrains and on medium terrains if it's that low on those things. So that's brilliant. But it's not so brilliant that they're being hidden. Another pretty important thing is penetration loss over distance. Now, shells, as you might know, do not keep their highest penetration value after travelling distance, especially shells where their kinetic energy determines their penetration, which are AP and APCR shells. So on some tanks, let's be very original and take the Mouse again, its penetration loss is the best amongst tier 10 heavies, with only 2% loss over distance, but penetration loss over distance can go down to 20%, and you can imagine if you've got 250mm of penetration, 20% could be your penetration reducing to 200mm, which is not enough to go through many tier 10 lower plates. Now, penetration loss over distance is different for every type of shell and on every single tank. If you watch my video on the different types of shells in Mod Blitz, you'll see that. But for a very quick summary, in case you didn't watch, I would still recommend watching it though, as it's very informative. Shameless plug. Heat and HE do not lose any penetration over distance, but cannot travel through objects, so there's your payoff. But AP and APCR lose penetration over distance, APCR losing more unless it is your standard ammo. The armor highlighter usually takes in account for this, but sometimes it doesn't, so it's just nice to know that if you're firing AP or PCR over distance, you have a much less chance of penetrating compared to heat or HE. The last and probably the most least important thing is the credit coefficient and the repair cost. Now, this affects how many credits you make after the battle, not just for premium tanks, but also for tech tree tanks. If you've ever played a tank like the WZ-113, the tier 10 Chinese heavy, you'll know that its repair costs and credit coefficients, well, the repair cost's high and the credit coefficient's really low, so it's really hard to make credits in that tank. You'll find that for most tier 10s, the repair costs are very high because of the amount of hit points they have. The shell costs are high, so you have to spend a lot of credits to maintain them, and if you start taking provisions and stuff like that, you will mainly be losing credits at tier 10 unless you use a premium account or a credit booster. Now, this is not the biggest issue in the world, but it'd still be nice to see this and have some reference on what is a good credit coefficient, what is bad, what is a good repair cost, what is bad. And you might have heard people talking about this in the form of the Angry Connor and the Chinu Kai having really good credit coefficients, same with the Lover, and this is why you buy the tank. It doesn't make a huge difference with premium tanks, but for tech tree tanks, it can really make a difference. So that about wraps it up for everything I know that Wargaming doesn't tell us in the garage. If there's anything that you know I've missed or anything you'd like to add, let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback. So if you want to, feel free to like and subscribe, and hopefully I will see you soon.